Colorado Territory, April 1872. The train whistle shrieked through the thin mountain air, echoing off the red hills behind the station in Gunnison. Just as Priscilla Harper collapsed onto the dust-caked platform with her carpetbag slipping from her fingers. "Ma'am?" A voice called sharply, boots scuffing the wood. Priscilla did not hear him. The heat, the altitude, the endless shaking ride from Missouri, her body had given out. She had not eaten since sunrise. She had barely slept in 2 days. The moment her leather boots touched Colorado soil, her knees folded beneath her. A cowboy dropped to one knee beside her. His hand, warm and steady, pressed lightly to her shoulder. Hey now, you all right?" His voice was rough but calm. "Can you open your eyes for me?" Priscilla stirred, the world tilting back into focus. Her bonnet had slipped sideways, her brown curls clinging to her damp forehead. She blinked up into the sunlit shape of a man. His face came into focus slowly, clear blue eyes, unruly dark hair, a strong jaw shaded by a few days' worth of stubble. Dust clung to his shirt and the ends of his sleeves, but his expression was gentle. "I." She tried to speak, her voice hoarse. "Water. I got you," he said. He uncorked a canteen and tilted it carefully to her lips, patient as she sipped. He waited while she caught her breath, then helped her sit up against a wooden crate. "Name's Holden McCrae," he said. "You just got off the Denver train?" Priscilla nodded weakly. "I am. A mail-order bride." Holden's eyebrows rose a little. He looked around the empty platform. "You waiting for someone?" She gave a shaky breath. "His name was Thomas Benton. We wrote letters. He paid for my fare. He died before I left Missouri. His sister sent word, but the ticket was already bought, and I had nowhere else to go." Holden looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood, offered his hand, and helped her to her feet. "Come on. You do not need to be out here like this." "I do not know anyone," she said, swaying a little. "I have no place to stay." "You do now," he said without hesitation. "My ranch is 10 miles west. You can rest there. You are not sleeping in the dirt." She hesitated. "Why would you help me?" Holden shrugged with a pull at the corner of his mouth. "Because you need help. And I was raised right." Priscilla's eyes filled with tears. Too much had happened in too short a time, and the kindness of a stranger was a sharp thing. She pressed her lips together and nodded. Holden picked up her carpetbag with one hand and steadied her with the other. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you home." The ride was quiet. Holden had a second horse tied behind his own, and he helped Priscilla up onto the saddle before swinging up behind her. His arms stayed respectful, just enough to steady her. She leaned into the warmth without meaning to. By the time they reached the McCrae ranch, dusk had painted the sky in streaks of orange and purple. The land stretched wide, framed by cottonwoods and low hills, with a windmill turning slow in the distance. The house was small but sturdy, built by hand, the windows glowing with lamplight. When they rode up, a little boy burst from the doorway. He had dark brown hair and a face full of freckles. "Papa!" he cried. Holden swung down, steadying Priscilla before lifting her gently to the ground. "Hey there, Nate," he said, ruffling the boy's hair. "This is Miss Harper. She is gonna stay with us for a bit. Be polite." Nate's eyes were wide as he looked up at her. "Are you a real lady?" Priscilla gave a soft laugh. "I suppose that depends on what you mean." "She is a real lady," Holden said, tossing Nate a wink. "Now go fetch some water for her to wash up." The boy darted off. Priscilla looked up at Holden. "You have a son?" "Yeah," he said, his voice quieter now. "His mother passed 3 years ago. Fever took her." "I am sorry." He nodded once. "Me too." Inside, the house was clean and simple. A single room with a kitchen tucked into one corner, a table, 2 chairs, and a hearth with a rocking chair nearby. A door led to a smaller bedroom. Holden showed her to it. "You take the bed," he said. "I will sleep in Nate's room tonight. I cannot put you out. You are not. You need a place to rest. That is all there is to it." Priscilla looked at him. "You did not have to help me. I know." When she closed the door behind her, her eyes stung. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands to her face. It had been so long since someone had looked at her with simple kindness. She had not expected it to come from a cowboy with dust on his boots and a boy tugging at his sleeve. The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of bacon sizzling. Nate peeked in. "Papa says you can wear Ma's dresses. They are in the trunk." Priscilla sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Thank you." He nodded. "You are pretty." She smiled. "So are you." Downstairs, Holden was at the stove, moving quiet and sure. He glanced up when she stepped in wearing one of the old dresses, faded green, a little loose, and his eyes paused. "You look nice," he said. "Thank you for everything." He handed her a plate. "Reckon you could stay a few days. Get your strength up." She sat across from him at the table. "And after that?" He looked at her for a long moment. "We will see." The days passed gently. Priscilla helped around the house, sewed new curtains from scraps, and read to Nate in the evenings. She laughed more than she had in years. Holden watched her quietly, his eyes always soft when they landed on her. He built her a shelf for her books, and when she thanked him, he said, "You belong here." One night, after Nate had gone to bed, they sat outside on the porch. The stars were sharp and clear above them. "I never thought I would end up in Colorado," she said. "I never thought I would meet someone like you," Holden said. She turned to look at him. "You barely know me." "I know enough." She hesitated. "What do you see?" "I see a woman who came here with nothing and still carries herself like she matters," he said. "I see someone strong, kind, good to my boy. And good to me even when you do not have to be." She swallowed. "I only meant to survive. You are doing more than that." He reached out, slow and careful, and took her hand. "Priscilla," he said, voice low. "You do not have to leave." Her eyes searched his face. "I did not think I had a future anymore." "Well, maybe you do." And in the quiet between them, something steady and warm took hold. Neither of them let go. The wind carried the scent of sage and damp earth across the pasture as Priscilla knelt near the garden plot, dirt streaking her apron. She pressed her hands into the soil, feeling its coolness against her skin. Holden had turned the ground with a shovel that morning, and now the rows waited, ready for seed. She'd brought out a pouch of beans and another of parsnip. The rhythm of planting gave her mind space to settle. Holden's boots approached from behind, the sound softened by the grass. He paused a few steps away. "You ever grow anything back east?" She brushed her palms off against her apron. "Just herbs in a windowsill. This is the first time I've seen land stretch far enough to plant as much as you please." "You've got a steady hand," he said after a moment. "Lines are straight, soil's just right." She looked up. "You watching my rows or looking for something to say?" He crouched beside her, resting his forearms on his knees. "Maybe both." She reached for the seed pouch again, her fingers brushing his briefly. "You always this careful with praise?" Holden glanced toward the cottonwoods. "I don't hand out words unless they're true. Waste of breath otherwise." She tucked another seed into the earth, slower this time. "I never thought I'd find quiet like this again. I didn't think I deserved it." "You think peace is something you earn?" His voice stayed even, but his eyes met hers, steady and blue. "After what I left behind, I figured I'd used up all my chances. He didn't ask for details, and she didn't offer them. Instead, he reached down and pressed his thumb into the soil beside hers, smoothing it over the seed she'd just placed. "Then we'll plant something new," he said. Inside the house, Nate's voice rang out, calling for his father. Holden stood, brushing his hands clean. "Sounds like biscuits are done," he said. Priscilla rocked back on her heels. "He baked. More like he watched and talked the whole time. But he's proud of them." Later, the three of them sat at the table, the biscuits rough-edged and a little burnt on the bottom. Nate tore his in half and slathered it with honey. "I'm gonna be a cook," he said, mouth full. "Better than anyone. You'll need to learn how to keep the flour in the bowl first," Priscilla said, holding back a grin. Holden leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "He's got the ambition, anyhow." That evening, as Holden led the horses into the corral, Priscilla stood at the fence, watching the light fade behind the hills. He closed the gate, then leaned his arms against the top rail beside her. "You always stand this still when the day ends?" he asked. "I like the hush," she said. "Back east, there was always something clattering. Here, it's like the land takes a breath." Holden didn't speak right away. The horses shuffled in the grass behind them, the wind tugging gently at his shirt. "You ever think about staying?" he asked finally. "I have," she said quietly. "But I don't want to take something that doesn't belong to me." "What if it did?" She turned toward him. "You mean the house? The land?" He kept his eyes on the sky. "I mean the space you've made here. With Nate. With me. It's not borrowed." Her breath caught. She hadn't expected plain words. Not from him. "I came here with nothing," she said. He looked at her then. "And still managed to give us something we didn't know we needed." The next morning, she rose before the sun. The fire had gone out in the hearth, and the house was still. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside. The dew was thick across the grass, and the first pink edge of dawn touched the far ridge. She walked down to the stream, where smooth stones lined the bank and the water ran cold and quick. She crouched and dipped her hands in, letting the chill chase sleep from her bones. Behind her, the brush rustled. She didn't startle. Holden's steps were easy to know by now. "You always up before the rooster?" he asked. She turned her head slightly. "Only when something's pressing." He stepped closer. "What's pressing?" "I want to stay," she said, not turning to face him. "But I won't if it's just out of pity or kindness, or because I'm useful." Holden moved to stand beside her, not too close. "I don't do anything out of pity." She met his eyes. "Then why haven't you asked me to stay outright?" "I didn't want to make you feel like you owed me something." "You've had enough of that in your life, haven't you?" She nodded, slowly. "Then let's be clear," he said. "I want you here. Not for the cooking. Not for the sewing. For you. For what I see in your eyes every time you look at this place like it might be yours." Tears pricked, sudden and hot, but she didn't look away. "I want to be yours," she whispered. Holden reached out, gently, and took her hand. His thumb brushed against her knuckles, rough and warm. "Then that's settled," he said. They stood there as the sun crested the ridge, light spilling over the land like a promise. A week after the frost had lifted for good, Holden came in from the barn with hay clinging to his sleeves and a question sitting heavy behind his ribs. He found Priscilla kneeling beside the hearth, coaxing flame from kindling with a twist of paper. Her hair was pinned back in a way he hadn't seen before, gathered low at the nape, and his breath caught a moment before he remembered why he'd come in. He leaned a shoulder against the doorframe. "Town's holding a spring gathering next Saturday," he said. "Music, food, folks coming in from the valley. I reckon Nate would like it." She straightened and wiped her hands on her apron. "Will there be dancing?" Holden gave a short nod. "Usually is." She looked at him then, her gaze unreadable. "And would you take me?" "If you'll go," he said. The fire caught just then, curling smoke up the chimney in a thin stream. She didn't answer, not with words, but the curve of her mouth was quiet and sure. Holden stepped outside again, the air warming with the season. He didn't say anything more, but he mended the wagon's axle that afternoon and brushed the dust from his one good coat. That Saturday, Priscilla wore a dress she'd taken in herself, pale blue with a collar edged in white. Nate rode between them on the wagon bench, legs swinging, pointing out birds and creeks like he'd never seen them before. Holden didn't speak much on the ride, but his hand brushed hers once as they rounded a bend, and neither of them pulled away. The gathering filled the center of town. Long tables stretched between storefronts, strung with bunting faded by years of sun. A fiddle sang from the porch of the mercantile, and boots tapped against packed dirt in time with the music. "Go on," Holden said to Nate, handing him a coin. "Treat yourself to something sweet." The boy took off, weaving between neighbors and wagons. Priscilla watched him until he vanished into the crowd, then turned to Holden. "Do you dance?" she asked. "Not in some time," he said. "But I remember how." They joined the line near the edge of the square, where other couples waited, hands clasped, laughter rising. When the music shifted into a reel, Holden offered his arm, and Priscilla placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. "I haven't danced since my sister's wedding," she said as they stepped into the rhythm. "That was 6 years ago." "Then we'll keep to the slow ones," Holden replied. They moved through the steps, not polished, but close enough. Priscilla's cheeks flushed, and Holden's gaze never left hers. Around them, the town whirled, but the space between them stayed steady, like something anchored deep. After the music faded and the dancers clapped, they stepped aside. Priscilla reached for a drink from a nearby table, then paused. "I saw a woman watching us during the last tune," she said, lifting her eyes. Dark hair, sharp eyes. Holden followed her glance. "That's Miriam Slater. Her husband owns the dry goods. She's not fond of me." Priscilla tilted her head. "Why not?" "She tried to match me with her cousin 2 winters ago. I said no. And now she's wondering if you've chosen someone else." Holden studied her a moment. "I have." She looked down at the cup in her hands. "You're not worried what folks will say?" "They'll talk either way. I'd rather they talk while I'm standing beside you." Nate reappeared before she could answer, face sticky from molasses and eyes bright. "I saw a man juggling ducks," he announced. "Real ones." Holden chuckled. "That's so? Can we stay until the stars come out?" Holden looked to Priscilla, waiting. She nodded. "We can stay." The sun dipped low by the time they loaded the wagon again. Nate curled up on a folded quilt in the back, already half asleep. Priscilla sat close beside Holden, her hand resting on his knee, light as a breath. As they turned toward home, the road dust trailing behind them, she spoke into the hush. "I used to think love had to arrive like thunder, loud and impossible to miss." Holden kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "And now I think it can come quiet. Like sunlight through shutters. Like the way you say my name when you think I'm not listening." Holden's jaw tightened slightly, but he reached for her hand and held it in his lap, firm and sure. The moon rose behind them, casting long silver lines across the prairie, and the road stretched ahead with no need for hurry. A warm rain swept in before dawn, drumming soft against the roof. It left the world smelling of wet grass and pine, and by mid-morning, Holden had hitched the wagon for a trip into town. The harness leather was cracked near the buckle, and Priscilla had mentioned needing lamp oil. Nate sat beside her on the bench, clutching a tin pail for sugar candy if there was extra coin. Holden glanced back at the house once more before setting off. You sure you're all right staying behind? I've sewing to finish and bread rising, Priscilla said. Besides, I can't let you do all the errands. Holden nodded, though his eyes lingered longer than usual before he turned the horses toward the trail. By midday, the clouds had thinned, and Priscilla stepped onto the porch, wiping flour from her hands. The air held a hush after rain that made every bird call sound brighter. She leaned against the post, watching the wind comb through the tall grass beyond the fence line. Inside the house, the bread dough had risen high in its bowl. She covered it again and began gathering the mending. Holden's shirt had torn at the shoulder seam, and Nate had worn through the knee of his trousers. She sat near the window where the light was best, thimble on her finger, needle moving in slow, even pulls. A knock sounded at the door. She stood, uncertain. Holden wasn't expected for hours yet, and neighbors rarely came unannounced. When she opened it, a man stood on the step, hat in his hands, boots dark with road dust. His coat was trimmed with brass buttons, worn but well kept. "Ma'am," he said, voice clipped. "Name's Deputy Marshal Webb. I'm looking for Holden McCrae." "He's in town," Priscilla replied, brows drawn. "Is something wrong?" Webb nodded once, gravely. "There's a man south of here named Roy Cadell. Broke out of territorial custody last week. There's reason to believe he might have crossed paths with McCrae before. We're riding to warn folks. Didn't mean to startle you." She stood a little straighter. "Has he hurt anyone?" "Not yet," the marshal said. "But he's taken horses. Broke into a homestead near Poncha Springs. No one was home. Just keep your doors bolted, ma'am. And let McCrae know when he gets back." "I will." She closed the door quietly after him, heart tapping faster beneath her apron. She slid the bolt into place and checked the back window latch before returning to the chair. Her hands shook a little as she picked up the needle again. The sun crept across the floorboards, slow and golden. She kept glancing toward the road, her stitches uneven now, the thread tugging too tight. When the wagon reached the rise near late afternoon, she stepped down from the porch before the horses had fully stopped. Holden's eyes met hers, and she saw the question in them. "There was a marshal," she said, voice low. "He came by." Holden lifted Nate down, then set the reins aside. "Webb." She nodded. Holden's jaw tightened, and he led the horses toward the corral. Priscilla followed. "What does this man want with you?" Holden opened the gate, unfastening the traces. "We worked together once. Long time ago. Roy and I were hands on the same crew. He got caught up in some bad things. I walked away. He didn't. Is he dangerous?" Holden's hands stilled on the harness. "He's bitter, mean when he drinks. But he's not stupid. He won't come here looking for trouble unless he's desperate." Priscilla stepped closer. "And if he does?" Holden looked at her then, his gaze steady. "Then I'll do what needs doing. But I won't let anything touch you or Nate." "That's not a promise I say lightly." She nodded, her breath caught somewhere between fear and something else harder to name. She reached for his hand, fingers curling gently around his. "I believe you." That evening, with the shutters drawn and the lamps lit, they sat at the table while Nate built towers with dry beans. Priscilla stirred the stew, her movements quiet. Holden pulled his chair closer, elbows on his knees. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked. She looked up from the pot. "You mean tomorrow?" "I mean next season, next year. If this place is where you want to root." She set the wooden spoon down carefully. "Are you asking me to marry you?" Holden's mouth twitched in surprise. "I was working my way around to it." "You're not very subtle." He leaned back. "Never claimed to be." She stepped closer, wiping her hands on her apron. "I didn't come here looking for love, Holden. I came because I had no place left. I know, but it found me anyway. Holden stood, reaching into his coat pocket. He pulled out a thin band of gold, simple and worn at the edges. It was my mother's, he said. She didn't have much, but she wore this every day of her life with my father. I think she'd want you to have it. Priscilla's throat tightened as he placed it gently in her palm. I'd be honored, she said. Nate looked up from his bean tower. Are you getting married? Holden glanced at Priscilla. That all right with you? She smiled, tears brimming. Yes, it's all right. The boy grinned, then knocked over his tower with a giggle. Then I get to have two parents again. Holden pulled Priscilla close, their foreheads touching lightly, the weight of the moment settling in like the hush before morning. Outside, the rain had vanished, and the stars blinked to life, quiet and endless above the roof that was now theirs together. The wedding was held on a clear Sunday afternoon beneath the cottonwoods along the stream, a few paces from the back pasture where the first calves of the season were finding their legs. Priscilla wore a dress she'd sewn from muslin bought in town, the collar trimmed with white lace she'd once tucked into her trunk in Missouri, not knowing if she'd ever have cause to use it. Her hands didn't shake as she tied the ribbon at her waist, though her breath caught when she stepped outside and saw Holden waiting for her near the water, his hat pressed to his chest. Reverend Alcott had ridden out from Gunnison for the occasion. He stood between them with his Bible open, voice steady as wind through tall grass. Nate stood to the side, holding a wildflower bouquet he'd gathered that morning, his boots polished with bacon grease and determination. When the vows were spoken, there were no great declarations. Just Holden's voice, low and sure. I'll walk beside you through everything we're given. And Priscilla's, quiet but firm. And I'll meet you there, every day. They kissed once, gently, and again when Nate whispered, You're supposed to now, tugging Holden's sleeve. The neighbors who'd come brought pies and preserves, and someone strung a fiddle with new strings. There was no dancing this time, just a long table laid across sawhorses, laughter under the trees, and the feeling of something deeply rooted settling into place. Weeks passed. The days grew longer, and the first shoots in the garden pushed up through the soil. Priscilla woke early one morning to find Holden already dressed, sitting at the edge of the bed with his boots in hand. You always leave this quiet? She asked, propping herself on her elbow. He looked back at her, brushing a hand over his jaw. Didn't want to wake you. You never do. Which is why I keep waking up alone. He stood, crossing to her side. Would you rather I stay in and let the cows go hungry? I'd rather you kiss me before you go, she said, tugging lightly at his shirt. He leaned down, brushing his lips against hers, then lingered, his forehead resting against hers for a moment. I'll be back before supper. You always are. She spent the morning teaching Nate how to stitch leather. He'd grown too tall for his Sunday boots, and rather than buy new ones just yet, she'd taken to patching the seams so they'd hold until fall. He stuck his tongue out the side of his mouth as he worked the awl, his brow knit in focus. Did your mother teach you this? He asked. No, Priscilla said, adjusting his grip. I learned from a woman who mended shoes in our neighborhood when I was a girl. She used to give me broken buttons and strips of scrap leather. Did you miss her when you left? I missed a great many things, but I don't anymore. Why not? Because I have everything I need here. That evening, Holden came home with a new calf slung across the back of the gelding. Its mother had died birthing it, and they'd have to feed it by hand. Holden built a pen off the barn and filled it with fresh straw while Priscilla warmed milk on the stove. You think Nate's ready? She asked, setting the pail on the table. He's been asking to help bottle feed for a year. She handed him the pail. Then it's time. Outside, Nate was already at the pen, arms folded over the top rail. The calf lay curled in the hay, eyes drowsy, sides rising with each breath. Holden knelt beside him, steadying the bottle while Nate leaned in, careful and slow. Priscilla watched from the doorway, arms around herself. The sky was turning the color of ripe peaches, and the scent of lilac drifted from the edge of the yard. She stepped down into the grass. Holden looked up when she reached them. "Got a name picked?" She crouched beside the calf, brushing her fingers over its damp ear. "Hope," she said. "Seems fitting." That night, after Nate had gone to bed and the lanterns were out, Holden sat on the porch with his shirt sleeves rolled up, his hand laced with hers. "I keep waiting for it to feel like I've imagined all this," he said. She leaned against his shoulder. "It's real." He turned his head to her, his voice quieter now. "I used to think I'd never find a woman who'd want this life. The work, the dust, the quiet. I didn't know I wanted it either," she said. "Until I found it." He kissed her temple, then the corner of her mouth. "You're the best thing that's ever come down that mountain." She smiled against his skin. "And you're the first man who ever let me stand beside him without asking me to make myself smaller." They stayed like that until the stars wheeled high above the fields, and the wind shifted to carry the scent of warm earth and horses. Years passed. The garden grew thick with squash and beans. The orchard saplings flowered in spring, and Nate grew taller, his laugh deeper. He helped Holden with branding and fencing, and when he rode into town alone for the first time, he returned with a sack of nails, a book for Priscilla, and a ribbon he'd picked out himself because blue still suits you, he said. Priscilla kept the ribbon in a drawer lined with cedar chips, alongside the ring Holden had given her, and the first letter Nate ever wrote her in careful block print. Signed, "Your boy always." Holden built her a room of her own off the side of the house, with shelves for her books and a window that caught the morning sun. She filled it with quilts and small stitch samplers, each one marked with a single word: trust, begin, stay. On the 10th spring of their life together, they walked the fence line at dusk, the two of them side by side, boots brushing grass, fingers entwined like it had always been that way. "I never thought I'd be this happy," she said, her voice soft with truth. Holden stopped walking. "I did," he said, "from the minute I saw you standing on that platform, looking like you'd lost everything and still standing proud." She turned to him, blinking against the wind. He touched her cheek. "You gave us home," he said. "Not this land. You." She pressed her forehead to his chest, breathing in the warmth of him, the scent of leather and wind. "And you gave me a place to belong." He kissed her beneath the darkening sky. Nothing hurried, nothing unsure. Just the quiet certainty of two people who had walked through loss and hard ground to find something lasting. When they turned back toward the house, Nate waited on the porch, taller now, shoulders squared, a girl beside him with laughing eyes and a braid down her back. He waved them in, and the lamps inside glowed soft against the windows. Holden and Priscilla looked once more at the land, the fields green with promise, the barn standing sure against the dusk, and the smoke curling from their chimney. And then they stepped inside together.